Let's roll. Well, good morning. Let me welcome everyone to today's event. Really excited to host what I think is the Mount Rushmore of cybersecurity. It is Cybersecurity Month. Dare I say I find that a little troubling because every month should be Cybersecurity Month. But the reality is it's great to bring attention to such a significant set of issues. My name's Frank Zalufo. I get to have the privilege to direct the McCrary Institute for Cyber and Critical Infrastructure Security. And today's event is looking at public-private partnerships, an issue we've all grappled with for, dare I say, decades. But I think we have the team in place that can translate the nouns into verbs and actually move the ball on a significant set of issues. Before we kick off and I introduce our speakers, I did want to take a minute to recognize that we lost a lion this week in Washington, D.C., someone who truly embodies all of what makes our country so great. And I did want to just take 30 seconds to have a moment of silence for the loss of a great statesman, soldier, and a great American. So please join me and take a 30-second moment of silence for Secretary and General Powell. Well, thank you. And we're going to start with, and no one on this stage needs to be identified, but I'm going to quickly go through everyone. You have their bios in the background, so I'm going to be brief. But first and foremost, we've got Chris Inglis, who is the National Cyber Director, and Chris and I had the privilege of working together on the Solarium Commission, which, dare I say, had a little bit of a role in enabling his position. Think of Chris as sort of the coach, the quarterback or the coach trying to help all the players on the field get to goal. And quite honestly, I think the country is blessed to have someone such as Chris in that role. Secondly, we've got Paula Bate, who's the Deputy Director of the FBI, has an incredible background on counterterrorism issues, national security issues, and the Bureau obviously plays an integral role in our cybersecurity efforts, both from a foreign counterintelligence standpoint and from a countering crime, and privileged to have Paul with us today and in that role. Then we have Jen Easterly, who is a rock star at CISA. Jen comes to the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency from a terrific career, Army background, West Point grad, and also in financial services. So really privileged to have Jen leading CISA's effort. Then we've got Rob Joyce, who is heading up the Cybersecurity Directorate at the National Security Agency. Rob is no stranger to cybersecurity issues and policy issues, having served in senior roles in the White House, and probably left the best job in government to take on this job. So thank you for joining us today, Rob. And last and certainly not least, we have Bill Furman, who is a strong voice and advocate on public-private partnerships. Quite honestly, at Berkshire Hathaway, he's getting stuff done, and I think recognizes the need to take this partnership to the next level and beyond admiring problems, beyond information sharing to joint collaborative types of environments. So I'm going to start with a very general question, and we'll start with Chris, and then we'll go down, and then we'll mix it up in terms of the questions going forward. But I mean, Chris, can you sort of shed some light on the significance and the importance, if you believe that's the case? I'm assuming you do, because we've had the privilege of working together, but around public-private partnerships and what you and your new role as NCD are trying to enable to make this all real.
Yeah, so first of all, Frank, thank you for the venue. Thank you for your personal service to this cause. and the opportunity to speak alongside what is, the rest of us at least, the dream team. And there are a number of people in the audience that I need to give due credit to, that we're following in the footsteps of people who've actually pioneered much of what we're going to discuss today. See Michael Daniels, I know that Mark Montgomery's out there, Mike McConnell, Teresa Shea, and any number of people from the private sector, because private-public collaboration is the essential thing here. I'll use my time to perhaps remember 20 years ago. Not long ago, we commemorated the 20th anniversary of 9/11. And if you recall those days, I think that there were two things that we concluded. One was the shock and dismay that our garrison was not our sanctuary. I attribute that remark to Michael Hayden, who I think was very thoughtful about how we should consider the moment. And responding to that required us to put together a national security and a domestic security solution that, in the day, the second thing we talked about was connecting the dots. And we thought that in order to defend that garrison, to make it at least a defensible sanctuary, we needed to connect the dots. I think as time went by, 2001 begat 2002, 3, 10, we understood that it really wasn't about connecting the dots. What the problem was is that we hadn't actually put our resources together to form dots. We actually had some hunches, some insights, some shards, shreds of information lying about in various stovepipes. And the challenge was that we hadn't actually collaborated so that we could discover something together that no one of us could discover alone. We actually, if we'd been able to put those shards, shreds, insights, hunches together before 9/11, we very well could have predicted it, but no one of us could have predicted it alone. That was the problem. Here we are now, 20 years later. Garrison still is not our sanctuary, times 10. We have the same challenge, which is that we have various insights, depending upon the stovepipe that you happen to live in. Insight, shards, shreds, hunches about what might be perhaps running ruthlessly across the boundaries that divide us. And the challenge isn't to connect the dots, that kind of issue of how do I actually share information by perhaps sanitizing classified proprietary information, get it down to where it's a nugget that I can actually pass across. It takes too much time, and what's left is of too little value. It's really not the challenge. The challenge is, how do we actually use the collective insights we have? How do we collaborate so that we can discover things together that we cannot discover alone? That's a fundamentally different proposition than division of effort, which in my view, division of effort is what we do on our best days today, and it's an agreement to not collaborate. So what's the premise? The premise is, how do we actually take our insights at a very granular, in a very timely way, and put those together such that we can co-discover and hopefully co-mitigate threats on the fly. You'll hear some discussion today about how we're beginning to do that. And when I say we, I mean the private-public relationship is doing that. And there is one thing that is profoundly different today than in 9/11, which is, in those days, most of the tools that were required to address the situation were the possession, the property, the authority of the government, or governments, plural. And in that respect, we needed the material advice, assistance, capability generation of the private sector. But you could have said in those days that the government was the supported organization and the private sector was the supporting organization. It's reversed now, right? The private sector is on the front lines of this skirmish, or whatever you want to call the situation. They build, own, operate, defend, right, critical infrastructure, as well as the massive digital infrastructure that we use for all the other purposes. It's the supported organization, and the government needs to place itself in a position where it supports, where it is the supporting organization, bringing resources to bear to the private sector. In that respect, the government needs to be very proactive, needs to be very coherent, needs to be joined up such that it is the partner that the private sector needs in that collaboration to defend digital infrastructure. At the end of the day, I think that the premise must be, we need to make it such that if you're a transgressor in this space, you have to beat all of us to beat any of us, that all of us can defend each of us. That's a fundamentally new concept, as opposed to everyone kind of do what you can within your stovepipe, using only your resources, only your insights. That's a recipe for disaster, failure. That's what we've been doing for far too long. So what's the job of the National Cyber Director? To establish that context, to champion the resources inside of that, to give those resources leverage, to give those resources whatever authority and capability they need, such that the team is stronger than the sum of its parts. If that's successful, then we can forget about the National Cyber Director, and I think this team is the one that actually is here to do that. And I mean by that the private and the public sector components of this collaboration. So thanks, Frank.
Are you working yourself out of a job already, Chris?
I'm hoping.
Let's hope we have that problem. Paul, I mean, looking from the Bureau's perspective and all the equities that you bring to this fight, and I might note, advisories like we saw last night around dark matter that had the seals of 3 agencies, I think is important. But please share some thoughts from the Bureau's approach.
Thank you, Frank. I wanted to start also by thanking you and the Institute for inviting and hosting us here today, and all of you for being here with us and everything many of you have done to build the foundation of the efforts we're continuing to undertake today to defend the country and our citizens. So thank you all for that. Just building on what Director Inglis said, a number of, really all of us here come from a time post the attacks of 9/11 where we worked in the countering terrorism fight, and that's a real world problem that involves physical harm, threat to life, health, and safety. What we're undertaking now on the cyber side is an elevated form of that in some ways, which hasn't as directly threatened life, but certainly holds the potential to do that, which we all here recognize. And it really requires an elevated level of collaboration, much like we've never seen before. And the private sector is core, essential, and key to that, because as the director touched upon, private sector, as we know, holds the vast majority, owns the infrastructure in the cyber realm, and given that is in a position to have the intelligence and really the answers and the solutions to solving the problems that we're faced with here, the challenges, and countering the bad actors that are coming at us through those means. They're also, as the director mentioned, the victims on the front line. So in that sense, as government servants leading our teams and agencies, we're here to serve you. And that's the bottom line, and that's what drives us in the work that we do every day. So we have a number of things that we're doing in the Bureau. We've had a recognition and a focus on building those public-private partnerships for a long time. I could go through the range of kind of groups and entities within the organization, but also across, and we work together to build those trusted relationships with, excuse me, all of you, the private sector companies, so we can get to a place where we have a deeper and broader sharing of information to help identify the threat as soon as possible and work to counter it, disrupt the actors who are bringing that at all of us, and then prevent bad things from happening before they occur. So again, thank you all for being here today. We're going to continue to work together with a strong focus on that and advancing the relationships that we have.
Thank you, Paul. Director Easterly. So, I mean, I think Paul framed it, not many companies went into business thinking they have to defend against national security threats and foreign intelligence services. And I think CISA is now coming to the point where, and I hope you touch on the JCDC, but where we're taking it into a real world environment. So please.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having us. Thanks to the Institute. It's great to look out and see a bunch of friends out in the audience. And it's great to be here with people that we've all worked with for years and some new friends as well. I think that actually matters because we always say cyber is a team sport, and I believe that life is a contact sport, so it really matters to have those trusted relationships. And many of us sort of grew up in the counterterrorism world, working these things together. And so those forged bonds and those understanding of the importance of collaboration and partnership is incredibly important. I'd probably make 4 points, Frank. First, and I got this from a good friend, a former professor of mine at West Point, Jane Lute, who of course was the former Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security. As I was going through my confirmation process, she said, Jen, national security, and that's really a space where many of us grew up. I was in the Army and intelligence and in counterterrorism. In national security, the federal government has monopoly power. In homeland security, and very much in cybersecurity, the federal government is really just a co-equal partner with the private sector and with state and local colleagues. So it truly is all about collective defense, in particular, given that we live in a highly digitized, highly connected, and highly complex threat environment that is evolving every day. So that's the first thing, which is foot stomp what you said about collective defense. The second, I think it's worth just recognizing CISA. I think most in this audience know what CISA is. We were created at the end of 2018. We're the youngest agency in the federal government. We were developed to be the agency's, the nation's cyber and infrastructure defense agency, and our mission is to lead the national effort to understand, manage, and reduce risk to the physical and the cyber infrastructure that Americans rely on every hour of every day to get gas at the pump, food at the grocery store, to get their power, their water, to get money at the bank. And so that is a critical responsibility for the defense of the nation. And within that mission, we play two important roles. One is to be the operational lead for federal cybersecurity. So we work very closely with Chris and the Office of the NCD, Chris DeRusha and the federal CISO, departments and agencies to protect and defend the .gov. And the other mission by statute is to be the national coordinator for critical infrastructure resilience and cybersecurity. And we think about that as those 16 critical infrastructure sectors. But I think more and more importantly, we need to look at this from a functional perspective. I see Bob Kolaski out there who leads our National Risk Management Sector Center, and they did some fantastic work in the 2019 period about looking functionally at all of these critical elements that keep all of the things running in the lives of Americans. And so I think very important to look functionally as well as through sectors. Now, one of the things that CISA does is to manage what's called CPAC, the Critical Infrastructure Partnership Advisory Council. So those are all the sector coordinating councils and the government coordinating councils that come together to share information and share programs and policies and processes to reduce risk to critical infrastructure. And CISA is, of course, the sector risk management agency for 8 of those sectors. But again, I think it's much more important to look functionally, which again really puts the onus on the partnerships across agencies and across sectors. The third thing I'd say is, 27 plus years in government, and I think the most important job to prepare me to be the director of CISA was the last 4.5 years I spent at Morgan Stanley as a senior technology and cybersecurity leader in a critical infrastructure owner and learning how to defend that entity in cyber. And it really gave me an appreciation that I didn't have of how the private sector interfaces, for good or for bad, with the government. And some of the observations I made during that time was interesting to me, having spent so much time in government. But from the outside, the government often looked disorganized, a little bit tribal, sometimes kind of competitive, and not as coherent as we needed to be in order to help to have those relationships that we needed to have with critical infrastructure to really defend the nation, knowing that, as has been said, over 85% of critical infrastructure is in private hands. And so I really welcome the fact that we have this great team of folks who have very well worked together in other places, and the addition of the National Cyber Director, Chris Inglis, who many of us have worked with for years, to add that coherence and that cohesion. And I think you're seeing that already reflected in things like the Joint SEAL product, and the latest one was Black Matter. But if you're following this closely, and I suspect everyone in this audience is, you've seen multiple SEALs. And so I think that's really important that the government speak coherently and with one voice. And I think you'll see more and more of that. And we've already had a ton of interaction in just the 300 days, I guess, since I've been here. So I think that's incredibly important. The last thing I'd say, and we can talk a little bit more about this, but we are really trying to shift the paradigm. I think this talk is called Next Generation Public-Private Partnerships. And I think next generation is really sort of throwing out the hackneyed term of triple P and kind of moving towards public-private operational collaboration. It has to be much more than partnership. It has to be working together in what Chris would call professional intimacy in real time, sharing information that's more than just information. It's enabling data to allow us to deal with a constantly evolving threat environment so that we can actually reduce risk and get back to a place where defense dominates the offense. And so JCDC is another great idea that came out of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. So thanks to Chris, thanks to, I see Mark Montgomery out there, thanks to Frank, just some great ideas from there. But one of them was this idea of a joint cyber planning office. And so we call that the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative. And I think the most important letter there is probably J, because this is something that CISA hosts, but it is really uniquely the power of the federal government. So NSA, FBI, Cybercom, DoD, ODNI coming together with the magic, ingenuity, and innovation of the private sector to create a common operating picture of the threat environment, to plan and exercise against the most serious risk to the nation, and then to implement coordinated plans to reduce that risk. And so I'm very excited about it. It's been 3 months so far, and I've seen the connective tissue strengthen among all of us, and then as well as with the private sector. So we've been working on ransomware. The Black Matter product is reflective of that. You probably saw that Broadcom contributed to that, Coveware contributed to that. And we're also working on a response framework for incidents in cloud providers. And then we will be starting on some critical infrastructure sprints. We look forward to working with Bill on that in particular as part of the 100-day pipeline initiative coming out of the White House, and really looking forward to getting some momentum. But this is all about the future of partnerships, which in my view is operational collaboration.
Thank you, Jen. So much there I'd love to unpack later on, especially around the operationalizing a lot of this. That is very exciting. Rob, from no such agency to an agency that's on the stage talking about working with the private sector, where from CSD's perspective and where do you see things going forward and your priorities right now from the public-private partnership?
Thanks, Frank. And you know, the nice part about being fourth in this lineup is I don't have to talk a lot about the things we're doing, because we could all give this same speech and have and do, because it is a story of coherence and collaboration across multiple agencies and entities, and there is strength in that. I think for NSA, the focus on our foreign intelligence mission and the unique insights it brings there is important, because what we've found is connecting that information into operational outcomes is vital. It's very nice to know things, but it is completely useless if we don't do things. And so in the national security space, as Jen talked about, we've been able to use those things at a very classified level to big outcomes. That doesn't work when we have to have the public partnership work with the operational elements who are going to be on the front lines dealing with national security threats, nation-state threats, criminals who live in safe havens of adversary countries. That takes us into a unique space where we've got to make that information operational, and that by definition means it's got to be in the unclassified space. It still can be sensitive, but companies handle proprietary and sensitive information all the time, right? We work in collaborative trust relationships in that world. And what I've seen in NSA in the last several months is we've been able to take that sensitive information, get it down to that unclassified level where it's operational, and work with companies in the defense industrial base, as well as the cloud providers and the TCOM providers, who really are the base of that defense industrial base. But that interaction of an analyst who's looking at the foreign threat and an analyst who's on a domestic network watching the packets go by is a special thing when they come together and then are able to operationalize it. You know, we've for years had things go up, over, around, and down, and frankly, that's too slow and often misinterpreted and doesn't have the genuine feedback loop that then lets you get better and better and more accurate, more relevant information. And those are the kind of things we've got to get to, right? That's what it's going to take to succeed in this space. And I think, Chris, the Solarium Commission have laid out that vision. We're all pulling in that direction. And then the partnership across, FBI, CISA, NSA, and a host of other government entities who are all in to figure out how do we do this and make it useful. It is really important, but that doesn't happen without the partners in the private sector talking to us because we speak different languages, right? And helping us understand how to connect into their world. So that's where the next steps in the evolution come in.
Rob, those are awesome points, and I do want to pull the thread on that as well in the limited amount of time we have. But before we get to that, Bill, you've got the simple job of speaking for all of industry in terms of what the public-private partnership should and could look like. But in all sincerity, you're in a driver's seat in a lot of these efforts already because it's in you have you see the opportunity and the responsibility from a leadership standpoint to address these issues. But I'd be curious where you see this partnership going and what you would like to see from government. Because I do want to, then phase two, I'm going to start with you, so think about it but don't answer it yet, is sort of the partnerships. Two elements are critical to success. Trust, and takes years to build, nanoseconds to lose. And then the other one, I think, is giving and taking. If you have free riders that are just taking, and if you have people who are just giving, it doesn't succeed. So it's looking at that dynamic of give and take. So I already foreshadowed the next question because I do want to go down the line on that one. But let's start with where you see things now and where some of those efforts are vis-a-vis the partnership with the government.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to this panel. I'm honored and humbled to be here to discuss these issues. I've also had the honor of working with the other panelists on trying to move this collaborative environment forward. As I look back at the last 3, 4, 5 years, I would say the focus on collaboration and really attacking the problems slipped back. And through my involvement in the Electric Subsector Coordinating Council, the National Infrastructure Advisory Council, we've been saying for 3, 4 years now that we have to do something like the JCDC. The NIAC report called it the Critical Infrastructure Command Center. The Cyber Solarium called it the Joint Collaborative Environment. But at the end of the day, it's some sort of partnership between the private sector and government that can bring information together and quickly analyze it, assess it, and send directives and insights back out to private industry so that we can actually do something about it and take aggressive actions to better protect the infrastructure that we all manage. And as I look at what's occurred over the past few months, particularly under the leadership of Jen on the JCDC and Chris, I am more excited now than I've been in a long time with regards to where this is all moving. And there isn't a stronger promoter of all this than me. If you see me and hear me, I will always promote what's happening at the JCDC because I think perhaps for the first time, at least in my managing history, and I look old, I feel old, I am old, and I've been doing this now over 40 years, is that government is coming together on their side of the equation to actually knock the silos down between all the various agencies and do something that is meaningful for private industry. And private industry has a role in this as well. We have to be able to provide the information that is critical to be assessed by government. And so as I as I think about where we're at, the hub and spoke approach, DOE plays a big role in this with their threat assessment center that we're a strong supporter of. And as we look at the other agencies as spokes, if we can actually move this and pull this off and keep driving in the right direction, I think there's going to be tremendous value in what this is going to do for the country.
Awesome, thank you. And sort of looking at what makes a partnership stick, work, and take it from concept to reality, theory to practice. What are you hoping to see? The one government approach, yes. Obviously, each agency brings something very unique to the fight. You don't want to dull that edge, but at the same time, what would you hope to see sort of going forward, Bill?
Well, clearly, the end game of all this is a very swift transfer of data into the government, having us sitting together in an environment where it can be assessed and the directives come back out so that we can quickly implement something. It's speed to defense is what I am looking for and hopeful that this will bring. Rob made an interesting comment, and as some folks know in here, is on these classified briefings that we go into, while it's very interesting to learn what's actually happening, what's most important and most useful is, what do you want me to do about it?
Exactly.
Because the most depressing time for me is when I go into these briefings and I get told all of this information and then I'm booted out and I go home and I have nothing that I can do for it. And I wallow in my own fears around what's going to happen. And I think that, again, the JCDC is the approach that will help bring all of that together and more swiftly move information from one to the other. And I was fortunate enough to tour the NSA, the Cyber Collaborative Center, and was hugely impressed by what's going on there and on the defense industrial base, that the activities that are going on there, the information sharing that's going on there, the analysis that's going on there is simply incredible. And I think, again, it's a good model that can be used across industry.
Bill, and I'm going to jump to Jen and then bring in Paul and Rob and then let Chris back clean up on that one. But do you envision a day where you will have your subject matter experts shoulder by shoulder working in a SOC or some similar sort of environment to address active sorts of threats? Is that what we're saying? Jen, do you want to pick up on that? And then Rob and Paul, I just sort of, your agencies can bring something very unique to the fight. Obviously, we know the National Security Agency has unique capabilities, and the FBI, and it's this foreign domestic challenge we all have struggled with in a counterterrorism environment, and we take all of the privacy and civil liberties issues very seriously, but at the same time you need a rich picture and a common operating picture of the overall threat. So I'll let you guys jump in on that. But Jen, it looks like JCDC is the beachhead into getting this done. And do you agree with Bill's sort of thoughts?
Yeah, and thank you very much for being a great advocate, a great partner, and really look forward to your leadership as we move, as we mature the model. I guess I'd say a couple things. Any relationship, whether it's a public-private partnership or a marriage, has to be based on the word that you said, trust, which is the most important thing. And again, I would go back to the fact that many of us have known each other for years and have worked together on very difficult missions. And so I think we start at a really good baseline. People that trust each other assume noble intent and know we're doing things for the nation, to defend the nation, with very, very low ego and no drama, ideally. So that trust is there, and that's important. Building that trust with the private sector is equally important. And I couldn't agree more with, because I had my TS clearance when I was at Morgan Stanley. I went to one briefing, and there was nothing that I could do with the information. So, at the end of the day, the kind of work that Rob and his team are doing in the Cybersecurity Collaboration Center, where you're in real time, sharing information, analyst to analyst, is a paradigm shift. And the connection that we're making between the Cybersecurity Collaboration Center and the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative and the NCI JTF from FBI, and bringing things together centrally, specifically the JCDC is from a cyber defense perspective, and because of our special authorities, which I really think about as our superpower, is to be able to share many to many. That's really the heart of what makes the JCDC special, is that we can bring in the partners of the federal government and we can share widely with the partners across the private sector. And that's what I think when people ask, why is this different? Why is this unique? I think that's one thing that makes this very, very unique. The other thing that I think is important is we all know that when bad things happen, we do heroics to respond, right? We jump in, we make sure that we take care of victims, we pursue them, we investigate them, we understand the intel picture, we do what we can to respond. But really, the key is to proactively get ahead of that, to do what I always like to call, as a retired military officer, left of boom. And that's really predicated on bringing together the power of the interagency and the power and ingenuity of the critical infrastructure sectors to plan ahead, so that even if what happens isn't exactly what we planned for, we understand how we operate in this space, right? Eisenhower always said, plans are nothing, planning is everything. And that's really the heart of the other thing that I think makes the JCDC so special. It's about being proactive and coming together to plan, and then understanding how we all operate so that we can implement those plans. And so I think those are two of the things that distinguish this, and what I hope will make this a highly successful enterprise.
Awesome. And not to ask the unfair question, but right now I think everyone would conclude that the initiative remains with the attacker. Do you think we can get to the point, Jen, and I'm asking you for that the initiative will be with the defender?
I think we have to, right? I mean, I always go back to Chris's bumper sticker, which I love, which is we need to get to a place where to beat one of us, you have to beat all of us. And that's about getting to that shift of defense over offense. And it's one of the reasons why we talk about not just working with critical infrastructure, but working with hackers and researchers and academics and people who are out there looking to responsibly disclose vulnerabilities on infrastructure. And one of the things that we're trying to do is to really ignite that community to enable us to be able to reduce risk to our infrastructure. So we're looking for we're trying to be creative, Frank, in addition to the JCDC, in creating these partnerships, and again, really igniting the communities that are focused on the defense to shift that dominance factor.
And Frank Salufa here, I think we always need to be top of game on the offensive side too, but that's a different conversation. Rob, Paul, anything you want to jump into what you think this collaborative environment could in fact look like?
So I thought, as you talked about, are we going to sit shoulder to shoulder? Yes, we have to. But cyberspace is an important place where we can be virtual. And that's something we've learned. It's not natural for NSA to be in a virtual environment, in an unclassified environment. But we had to go there for two reasons, right? Industry in the pandemic lived and worked in the virtual environment, but also we're so diverse in geography. If you think about the size of the nation and where the critical infrastructure is and where we have to defend, I'm sorry, the best analysts aren't going to want to come and live and work in DC just because that's the place where the ops floor is, right? So we have to build the trust, and a lot of the trust is built with those personal relationships, but there's got to be ongoing, continuous iteration.
Did you speak to HR before you? No, I'm kidding.
There's got to be that ongoing interaction in a virtual environment, because that's where we're going to get the speed and the expertise together.
That is the truth. Paul, I come back to, and Jen, I think, hit this point. A lot of what history may repeat itself, but it tends to rhyme. Mark Twain, one of my favorite quotes. And A lot of what we are seeing is similar to some of the battles we saw post 9/11 in the fight against terrorism. And whether there it was maybe more synchronizing Title 10 with Title 50 authorities and getting the domestic pieces together. But when it comes to cyber, there are a lot of lessons, I think, we have scar tissue from our efforts post 9/11 in the counterterrorism environment that can be applied to cyber. Do you see that? Do you share that?
Well, I wanted to go back to what Bill said. I think he said it extremely well when he talked about the speed and urgency with which we need to move information and intelligence to stay left of boom, be preventative, protect, defend, build resilience. And I think what we're all seeking in that is simplicity. Both private sector and in government, for a long time we've talked about having the ability to go to one place and get all the information and intelligence we need to put ourselves in the position to do that. And we've strive for that for years and years now, and I think we're closer to that, and we've made tremendous progress, so it's all very positive. And that's the brilliance of the creation of JCDC and the broad impact positively that can have, I think is really important. But we also have to recognize that simplicity isn't always the answer. We do have this outreach and engagement ecosystem. Each of our departments and agencies and offices have some new, some that have been around for a long time, groups and constructs that bring private sector and government together. DSAC, InfraGard, NCFTA, that have been working at this for a long time. So I think each of those components has their role. There's the tactical and the strategic. There's the front line out in the field and here from the national perspective. So I think we have to continue to leverage all that. We have to work harder. I think we're closer across government than ever before because of the relationships. We're closer with private sector than ever before. But the thing is, with the threat evolving, we have to continue to evolve. We have to continue to work hard at that. There's no simple answers here, and the bad guys are working hard and adapting and always staying ahead as well. So we have to keep all these complicated ideas in mind when we work toward the goals and objectives. And I think the HR point is important too, because we're all doing a lot of hiring. We are, I know that CISA is, NSA, and we have to think about, especially in these challenging times, the workforce, who we're bringing in, and we always have to train and educate people, new people, but also those on board to keep up with all this, to understand that ecosystem, to understand what the functions are and the role that each of our agencies and departments play, and then the constructs within that to continuously keep pace and move ahead.
Well said. And I think the Bureau's mission of fighting crime and foreign counterintelligence positions it very uniquely, because left of boom, whoever's behind that clickety-clack of the keyboard, motive matters, yes, but capabilities to get to what that motive is, I think, are kind of unique and interesting. And I just think that mindset is important to bring to this fight. I might note awesome ideas, and I do think from an HR standpoint, what will get young people working for all of your agencies is the mission. That's the bottom line. You have awesome missions. It's to protect our country. It's to preserve our national security. But retention might be another set of conversations. And I think we've got to get a little more comfortable with people going in and out of government, which I think is maybe a lesson industry has. Please, Jen, and then I want Chris to jump in.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, actually, on the workforce and also having to change up some of our HR policies. One of the things that I am most excited about is being able to implement, as part of our CISA talent management ecosystem, something called CTMS, which is the Cyber Talent Management System, which was actually created in law about 7 years ago, and it's taken this long to actually put it into play. But it's exciting because it does a couple things. First of all, it takes it out of the bureaucracy of personnel management, which I have rediscovered is terrible. so, and really prevails against bringing in people at any scale. And so what it does is it focuses on aptitude and attitude, which I think are absolutely critical to identifying people from a young age who are the puzzle solvers, who are the intellectually curious, but also really good teammates and collaborative people, and gets them started on a career of cyber. So I think that's one important thing. It pays them a little closer to market. So yes, we want people who are in to defend their nation, but it's important to be able to compensate somebody a little bit closer to what they could be paying if they went to Silicon Valley or if they went to the financial services sector, and then to be creative in terms of coming in and out of the government and moving into the private sector, maybe for 1 year, 2 year. You can do this under this system in a way that you can't do it in today's HR system. So I think that will really help. It'll also help, which I think is really important, is to be able to rotate people around the federal government, have people in FBI and NSA so that we can continue to strengthen that connective tissue internally as well as with the private sector.
Those are all great points. Chris, I sort of, and I don't want to lead the witness, but maybe I will.
Please do.
No, in all sincerity, we timing matters. And I think you have a lot of the actors over here on the stage who can make a lot of these concepts reality. The pessimist in me says we've had this conversation in the past. The optimist in me says at least now we're all admiring the same problem and can sort of get things done. From an NCD perspective, this collaborative environment, how can you help enable that? And I know you've also been tasked with a massive responsibility to work with others, but to sort of look at workforce. So since that conversation jumped right to the front and will be a front burner for years to come, I'd like for you to comment on that as well. But the operational collaborative environment, how can NCD help make that a reality?
Yeah, the NCD is at once a member of the team and responsible as the coach for the performance of the team, but it's a member of that team. This is a great team, and I mean by that to include the private sector. I would simply go to a very important word, which is strategy. In the absence of strategy, nothing can be strategic. We've talked about some very important pieces of the puzzle here. Collaboration has to be the mode by which we apply very diverse, very capable authorities, people in the constituent pieces of kind of technology and doctrine. But if we don't have a strategy to which we can attach that, it'll just be a lot of interesting action with some tactical successes, occasional kind of things that we can write home about, but it won't have the staying power. So what's that strategy look like? I think first and foremost, we need to become a harder target. We need to increase the resilience and the robustness of not just the technology, but the people who are on the front lines of that technology, all people, not just those with the word cyber or IT in their names. Everyone needs to know something more than you get by simply being raised in the proximity of this technology. Most people are not digital natives, they're app natives. They need to know a little bit more than they do by just kind of showing up. So we need to increase the resilience of technology and people. And the third word I normally use is doctrine. And by that I mean what we've been having a discussion about, roles and responsibilities. Do we know who is accountable for what? Very popular question in Washington now, who's in charge? That's actually, it's an interesting question. It's sometimes an elegant question. It's a terrible question, right? The question is, who is accountable for what, under what circumstances, and for what purposes? When you actually ask that question, you begin to then get to the threads or the life forces that course through this very complicated picture, and you begin to sort out who actually is going to do what, under what circumstances, for what ends. So the first part is make ourselves a harder target. The best we can do if we do that properly is to create a defensible system, technology, people, and doctrine. It then must be defended. It's not secure. It doesn't defend itself. That's a human proposition. We have to have early discernment, early action, early engagement of problems, anomalies that we can detect in that system, whether they're attributable to human error, or a squirrel chewing into an electrical cage somewhere on the electrical grid, or God forbid, right, a nation state coming at us across digital infrastructure. All of those are challenges. That's really the true definition of cyber. It is technology, people, and doctrine exercised in the presence of an adversary. Therefore, we don't get to choose the time and place that they'll come at us, but we do get to choose the manner in which we respond to that, crowdsource them the way they're crowdsourcing us. And the third piece of that strategy is to align actions to consequences. I say it that way. It's often said as we need to find and punish the guilty. There's a piece of that that is appropriate and necessary. But when I say align actions to consequences, there should be rewards for good behavior. If you performed well, faithfully, diligently in this space, you deserve, right, the collective action of the crowd that's standing to the left of you, the right of you. If you're a small concern in the private sector up against a nation state that's coming at you, you deserve the full and proper support of your government or whatever constituency you happen to be a part of with respect to the sector that you're in. We don't often do that. I talk to people in the private sector whose perception of government is your job is to find and stab the wounded. We need to fix that. At the end of the day, if you've not performed well in this space, there will be consequences. There should be liability. But for the most part, if you perform well in this space, you're not alone. You're not standing kind of alone with your own resources, your own insights. You deserve to understand that we're going to come and help you. So you put those three pieces together, defensible proposition, technology, people, and doctrine, actually defend it, and align actions to consequences. That's a strategy to which we can attach these very diverse capabilities and perspectives that are present in this room and well outside of this room. I think if we do that, that actually has a transformative effect on what we've been doing up to this point in time, which on our best days I would characterize as a division of effort, an agreement to not collaborate, and probably on most days is simply a deconfliction, right? Where you essentially say, you do what you do, I'll do what I do, without some kind of upfront doctrine as to how they complement one another. And if we bump into each other, we'll kind of dust each other off and proceed on our own separate directions. That is not going to work. It hasn't worked well for the last 40 years.
Great points. And I mean, I think to underscore the doctrinal piece, so we have a lot of strategy, not always necessary with the same outcomes in mind. I joke we have a plandemic of plans, or lots of TTPs, but the space between strategy and tactics is something I think we as a country do need to get our arms around. I'm going to turn to what some of those impediments, those benefits and burdens you've all hinted at, what they could look like. But before we get into that, workforce. So you've been tasked with a massive responsibility there. Any thoughts you want to share, Chris?
Yeah, so I'll kind of build on some of the things you've already heard, which is that I think when we think of the cyber workforce that we have to have, we need to think about every person who is in or is served by cyberspace, not just the ones who have cyber or IT in their names. There's a concept I used to teach at the Naval Academy. I joke it takes an Air Force officer to raise a naval officer. Turns out it's true. One of my children graduated from there. But they have this wonderful concept, which is they say that we approach the challenge of developing the workforce we need in cyberspace through an all, many, few proposition. Everyone needs to know something more about cyber than they do just by showing up, right? How do you actually create in the mind of a 5, 7, 10-year-old the ability to cross the digital cyber street in the same way you have confidence that they can cross a busy street in the city of Washington, right? There are some very straightforward things you need to tell them about the true nature of cyberspace, which most people would assume somebody else is taking care of. No, they're the ones on the front lines. They need to know something more. And therefore, at the U.S. Naval Academy, and this is not a bad idea, every student, regardless of whether you're an English major or a nuclear engineering major, takes 2 courses in cyber. The first is that life-changing experience to say this is what it really looks like. This is how it really operates. These are the things that you essentially kind of take on as risks or opportunities in that space. And the second course gets into a bit more details about what the Navy needs them to know. The many proposition is there are many professionals who don't think that what they do implicates cyberspace, and yet it does. Whether they're lawyers or systems engineers, logisticians, human resource specialists, the decisions they make about how they build, operate, defend, kind of make use of digital infrastructure or provide resources that ultimately flow into and affect the character of digital infrastructure, need to be informed by something more about cyber than they would get by simply going to 3 years of law school or 4 years of engineering school, and so on and so forth. CEOs, COOs who essentially get to their positions, if they haven't in the professional kind of training development that they've undertaken, if they haven't understood something more about what the true nature of cyberspace is, then they're likely to set up for failure because their expectations, their decisions will be based upon flawed premises. And then there's the few, the ones who have literally the word cyber or IT in their name. And whether you're talking the private sector or the public sector, we're about 1/3 short of them today. There's a broad array of initiatives that's underway, whether that's at the National Security Agency in the private sector, the Department of Homeland Security, all of which have great merit, but generally they kind of boil down to several propositions. One, we need to take another look at those jobs to make sure we properly define the skills required. Not every one of them requires a Master of Science in Computer Science. IBM did a really good job of that several years ago. It's an exemplar of best practice to say, can you actually look at those and define, tell me what you really need? And when you do that, you then open up to a much broader population the opportunities that heretofore have been restricted to a precious few. Two, we need to get these opportunities in front of the largest possible population, preferably as early as possible in grade school. I saw a statistic not long ago that said typically when somebody gets to 8th grade, they're finishing grade school, they have a 40% chance of having been kind of confronted at some point in time by either the opportunity or the challenge of a job in cyberspace. We need to make it such that just like robotics or just like STEM education, we put that in front of every child at the earliest possible opportunity and in a way that's exciting. Not, hey, do you want to do something dull, boring, and dweebish? You can go over here and be a cyber person. Put it in front of them as a very exciting proposition. You can defend the world, right? It's a gamification moment. And if we do that, we'll then increase the pipeline, and it'll be a diverse pipeline that'll be then hugely helpful to us. And the last thing we need to do is to think about not just the education, but the training. How do we actually give them the experience necessary to get from the academic kind of institution to the job that they actually want to have? Understanding that sometimes it's the co-op, it's the internship, it's the summer tours that are going to be the most formative moment of someone's experience and actually make them quite more valuable when they show up at that front door. If we actually then become Sherpas for people as they kind of make their way from aspiration to a job of some consequence, I think we'll find that we're in a much better place. That's a pretty comprehensive agenda. It's a very complicated agenda, but we have to do all of those things. There's no one silver magic bullet that we can undertake to get this job done.
Well, thank you, Chris. That was a very elaborate response and a very strong way to the question, which I think is the vexing question we're all going to be struggling with, whether it's in government, whether it's those unique skills that are needed at Fort Meade, whether it's those skills at CISA, whether it's the FBI intelligence analysts and FBI agents of tomorrow are not necessarily all going to be cyber experts, but they better be cyber savvy. Or whether it's in the private sector. I don't think there is a company that's not a cyber company today, whether they know it or not. And Chris, I'm glad you brought up the diversity. We do need to diversify that workforce. We need more women in the field. We need more people of color. There's just so much more that needs to be done there. Because I don't think we win the numbers game, and I'll be very blunt. A country that recently tested a very unique weapon, we lose that numbers game when we look at the threat. And we better ensure that we have not only the best technology, but the best people enabling all that. And I'm sorry to go on a soapbox. But Jen, I do want you to, I saw you wanted to jump in. And then Bill, I'm going to put you on the spot for the first question on what the real benefits and burdens are going forward to make this real. But before we get into that, Jen.
I just wanted to foot stomp the point on diversity. We need greater diversity in the field. We need greater diversity in the room. We probably need greater diversity on this stage, right? It's just incredibly important. So we're doing a lot on this. I think all of us are doing a lot on this. I'm just making a shameless plug for the CISA Cyber Summit. It's the National Cyber Summit, actually. And it will go on tomorrow, and it's all about the workforce, to include a panel moderated by Chris Inglis, which I think will be great. But if you have not had the opportunity to check it out, please do so. It's every Wednesday this month, and it's all available on YouTube. You can see superstars like Rob Joyce and Bill Furman in there, and our FBI friends, and so it's worth the watch.
Awesome, awesome. Bill, taking sort of and it's not meant to wrap the bow and get into the brass tacks discussion, but beyond acknowledging that we need to work together, beyond and hopefully getting shoulder to shoulder, there are definite benefits and burdens to this, yes? So if we get to that, what should that look like? And dare I say, when we think of our critical infrastructure sectors on the x-axis, and I think rightfully so, Bob Kolaski-Shop and Jen brought this up, critical functions on the y-axis, companies like cloud companies or clocks, P&T in terms of positioning, navigation, timing. No one would have thought of those in the traditional sense, but they are very much aggregated risk. And the point that I'm sort of trying to convey here is there are consequences, good and bad, for this partnership. Small and medium-sized companies, they don't have the resources necessarily. So there's a whole different set of needs that we need to be figuring out there. But let me ask, and not to put you right on the spot on this, but you are leaning forward. You see the benefits. You see, I think, also the real need. You can't do it without that support. But what does that look like? And then I'd ask sort of from our government colleagues what we think the benefit burden mix looks like as well.
So as I think about companies and whether they're big or small, because of where the world is going and the threats that we're dealing with, which continue to evolve constantly and much, much faster than we can evolve our defenses, at least at the moment, there's basically a principle that if you can't afford to protect your company, you probably can't afford to be in business. And I think ultimately that's where we're going to be heading, is that companies, whether they're small, medium, or large, if they're involved in such things that attach to critical infrastructure or attach to quality of life issues for people across the various sectors, if you can't afford to protect your company, then I think you have to begin thinking about whether you can even be in business going forward. And as far as the burdens and the movement towards the collaboration, I'm obviously optimistic. I'm a very strong supporter of this, but I also know there's companies out there that are not as optimistic as I am, and perhaps are even very pessimistic about this. And it has to do a lot with perhaps experience of the past, where the movement of data to the government was a transaction. And in most cases, it was a one-way transaction where it went in and it never came out, and nothing came from it. And there was a burden applied to a company to do something with no real tangible benefit on the other end. And I think that's the beauty of where we're at today with the JCDC and the collaboration of everybody on this panel, is that the move now is towards using that data for good. There's a very significant and I think valid concern around data going into the government, and is it going in for the purposes of national defense and critical infrastructure protection, or is it going in for some sort of regulatory consequence that could come back against companies? And again, as we look at moving this forward and moving it forward in a big way, there's going to have to be a confidence built across companies that when the collaboration is occurring, It's occurring for the purposes of national defense and defense of critical infrastructure, not for the purposes of some sort of regulatory consequence or a validation of whether you're doing something right or wrong. All that can be handled, but to make sure there is an understanding of what that data is being used for and why companies should put the systems in to transfer the data and put that cost onto their business, there needs to be a confidence built on the other side, and that will take time. There's pessimism out there around doing this, and I think it's incumbent upon people like myself to go to those companies and begin working with them to figure out, is there a path forward? Is there a bridge to where we've been to where we want to go? And can we make that happen with the support of colleagues here on the stage?
So those are really important points, and I'd love for our government rock stars to sort of end, because we have been here before. It's not that there wasn't the intent, but the threat has also sort of hit a point that I think everyone in America recognizes that we are at risk. So they say a pessimist is an optimist with experience, but I'm still optimistic. I am today. So I'd be curious what my fellow panelists think on Bill's very valid point. So Jen, you want to start? Because I saw you were jumping, and then
I'll start.
Chris.
I want to pick up on a couple of things. Those are some terrific comments, Bill. First of all, I think we are sort of in a space where size doesn't matter anymore at the end of the day. I mean, everything is connected, whether you're a huge business or whether you're a small business, often connected through vendors and supply chains. And so everything is truly vulnerable. And that's why it goes back to our big point about collective defense, right? So I'd say that first off, in terms of what's different, not only do I think we have the right people to actually make a true difference, but with respect to the JCDC, this is the first cyber entity that by law brings in the power of NSA, the power of FBI, the power of Cybercom and DoD and ODNI in a way that we have not had before, importantly, with the private sector. We've not had something like that before. And again, even though this is the host, I just want to emphasize that this is really about the power of jointness between public and private. So I think that's different and important. I think with respect to some of the skepticism and cynicism that I know you're going to beat out of all of the private sector folks, I think that's totally reasonable, right? We've all, even when I was in the private sector, we had experiences that give the government data that you don't get anything back. But I think what you've heard from us, what you've heard from Rob, is really this paradigm shift in ensuring that we are actually very, very focused at making sure that information is not just shared, but information is provided in a way that becomes an enabler, right? So it is everything that we share, in my view, needs to be able to be used by a network defender to strengthen the security and resilience of their network. And that is a very purposeful and intentional difference than just plain old vanilla information sharing. And so that's the other paradigm shift, is moving from partnership to operational collaboration. All that said, this isn't a trivial endeavor. Right? And it's going to take a while to get it set up the right way, and we're going to make mistakes, and we're going to constantly be in a feedback loop, which I think is incredibly important. But I think we will get there. I was encouraged. I went out to London to meet with Lindy Cameron, who's the CEO of the National Cybersecurity Center, and they set up what's called Industry 100, where they bring in private sector partners, and we met with about 25 of them. And their comment was, they had that same level of skepticism when they first started, and it took a while, maybe 9 months to a year, before there was real value in their program. But again, if you assume noble intent, if you lean forward on trying to find value, I think it will be there. And I'm an optimist, and I'm as optimistic as I've ever been. As our friend General Powell said, relentless optimism is a force multiplier.
True that. And I might note, not to get into military strategy, but there is a difference sort of between jointness and joint and combined. So you can put parameters around the data. And I think that is, Bill, I don't know if he was expressing from his perch, but I've heard that from many executives and CEOs. And at the end of the day, they're responsible to their shareholders. That's the ultimate where the buck stops. And I think what we need to do is make that collective case that it is a collective defense set of issues, because their shareholders are not in a good place if we're not doing all we can to protect.
But it's also an existential business risk.
That's
and I think
from yes.
Leaders now, I think, recognize that strongly, and more, right? We need to do a better job of making that clear, but in terms of the threat, but I think that is something that's changing as well.
And that is sort of the difference between exploit and disrupt. So we do need to get our arms around that. But Chris, Paul, Rob, I sort of looking at that benefit burden discussion. And
just two quick points. Put me in the camp strongly of optimist, but I think we're going to make our luck. I think if we have positive expectations about what we're going to do, it will rise to meet our expectations because we're going to compel it to do so. If we have negative expectations, it will almost certainly descend to meet those expectations. And so we need to be very positive about this, but then back that up with what are we going to do to make that happen, make our luck. You've asked about benefits and burdens. I think there's a very simple mathematical proposition that we need to consider at every turn, which is, do the benefits outweigh the burdens? Right now, that might not be immediately kind of found in the kind of decision that lies before you, but we need to know what the answer to that question is. I sometimes hear we're going to collect information, and then you kind of listen and you say, for what purpose? Well, I don't know. I like information. Information in and of itself is valuable. What's the benefit associated with that? If we define what that is, we can then have perhaps a greater success in collecting that information, using that information. We just need to know at every moment, why are we imposing this burden? What is the benefit? If it's not a greater benefit than the burden we're about to impose, then why on God's earth are we doing it? Right? And so that's a question that we need to ask at every single turn, such that we drive the system to a positive outcome as opposed to overburden it with wet blankets and decisions that might be vicariously interesting or intuitively interesting, but actually have no purpose at the end of the day.
Paul?
We and I are highly optimistic as well. Let's start with that. I think we have exemplars of this already, but the bottom line is, as already been said, we have to come closer together and continue to work to achieve true integration and jointness. Each of our agencies and departments, we have, as Jen noted, we have individuals, detailees, embeds that are already, for a long time now, working side by side or virtually in this day and age. And I think the next step is, though we have examples of this, is with the private sector to better achieve that as well. And like any relationship, it's about the trust, but it involves taking risks on both sides for mutual benefit as well. So I think we have to we have to be willing to take those risks, set the appropriate legal and regulatory and policy frameworks, and certainly operate within that, but strive to maximize the outcomes and the benefits within that while taking measured risks to achieve that.
So probably the one thing I should not say to a senior FBI official, but do you envision hostage taking? And by that I mean private sector folks sitting side by side in the Bureau and vice versa. Do you envision that 5-7 years out? I see some of your colleagues from the National NDCA down in Huntsville. They're doing some really good work with the defense industrial base. So I'd be curious, is that in the cards potentially?
Yes, absolutely. Not only do we envision it, I think there, again, are examples of that occurring already, as you cited, or the NCFTA is another good example of that. And we have had individual instances, though it is challenging when you take into consideration potential competitive advantages and, again, legal requirements and parameters, but we have done it. We've done it individually, and we've done it in larger settings, and it's real, it's achievable, and we do envision doing that more and more. We all do here. That's what we're talking about. That is the future and the next frontier.
Rob?
So sharing information doesn't get to outcomes. What we found is we have to put capable people together in that conversation and the joint work. If we are talking to a company's government policy shop, we don't get to outcomes. When we talk to the threat intel analysts in a large company who have their hands in the data, dirt under their fingernails, and I pair them with a SIGINT analyst who is looking at that threat from an overseas nation state, that's when magic happens, right? So we both have to be all in, and we have to ask ourselves, do we have the right people connecting with the right talents? Because just passing the information is not going to get us to success.
That's a great point. And do we have, because I mean, ultimately, and I don't mean any disrespect to the lawyers, but it's not all about the law. It's in the doers' sort of hands to take a concept to reality. And I'd be curious, do we have the mechanisms in place? JCDC is one, NDCA is one, but what do we have? Do you think we are in a point where we can connect with the right doers in both environments?
Yeah, so at NSA, that Cybersecurity Collaboration Center is absolutely delivering in that space, right? That's that little experiment, and now we've got to figure out how to take that to a much grander scale.
Awesome, because I mean, at the end of the day, it's the same outcomes and incentives, right? If we all get something, and we as a country and the citizens of our country benefit from a more secure and resilient environment, that's where we need to get to. And I forgot to let our viewers on whatever social media they are viewing us on today, if they have questions, to please put them in the message box. I do have one here, so let me make sure it's a good question first. Sorry.
Otherwise you don't.
I submitted it.
Actually, it gets to partnerships and high school students and JROTC and Civil Air Patrol and Scouting and Explorer. So and I'm not going to be as eloquent as the question was, but at what age do we start recruiting this workforce? And I'm going to just have to jump in with my own thought on this quickly. I stood up the first MBA with the focus on cybersecurity at GW, and I'd bring my students every year to a practicum overseas, to Estonia. Small country, wired country, lots going on. In addition to meeting with the president and all the cabinet members of the country, we would spend part of the day in their kindergarten, and then in gymnasium, which is their high school, for cyber-focused. In kindergarten, kids were learning English, Estonian, and coding. And in high school, they're all given a tablet, and if they can't hack the system to change their grade, they end with an F. They fail. So they're white hat incentivizing some of this. What is the right age group here, and what are the partnerships? And I know countries like Estonia and Israel are small countries, so they can do things maybe a little bit differently. In Singapore, you can throw in there as well. But what is that right age group? Is it elementary school and Berkshire Hathaway? I mean, how are you going to start recruiting kids at that sort of age? So I'm just curious what everyone's thoughts are on that. Please.
If you buy into the all, many, few approach, the moment you're teaching a child not to touch a hot stove or how to cross a street, you ought to also tell them something about the true nature of cyberspace. And so as early as humanly possible, emphasis on humanly possible. But if you're looking for those kind of deep and sharp skills, I think the moment they're in an educational context or perhaps being kind of placed in the proximity of something that might be an interesting avocation for them, this needs to be in the mix. And not as something deep and special and in a corner and only for the precious few, but lay it in front of them as this is an interesting, kind of highly compelling kind of area or body of work. You should essentially consider this and make it such that you appeal to the broadest possible audience. Your earlier discussion of diversity is exactly right, but it's not just the legal thing to do or the fair thing to do or a way to get the numbers up. It's the way to create the intellectual heft. You create some mission essential component of your workforce that's based upon that cognitive diversity. And so get it out there as early as possible so that you attract the largest, most diverse population possible.
And I want everyone to jump into this, but I have to say, ethics, though, is important at a very young age for kids, too, because our workforce is our greatest asset, but a bad apple and an insider threat can be the greatest threat. So let me build on that.
I think that's right. So I took the bait about kind of the technical aspects of this, but ethics is essential. There's a certain way that we want our citizens to essentially address each other, address situations, address common challenges, and critical thinking is also essential. Yep. Because I think the number one skill that I would imbue kind of students with is, can they actually look at a body of information and come to some reasonable conclusions based not upon a script, but based upon their ability to get down to foundations and understand what are the facts, convenient or otherwise, and come to some conclusion. That works in cyberspace, that works in a physical situation where you're in a busy place. We I think, too often assume that someone else will make those choices for us. Someone else will defend the material that we hold near and dear in and through cyberspace, when at the end of the day, it's our prudence, it's our critical thinking skills that has to backstop that.
True. Jen, anyone else want to jump in on that?
I'll jump in.
This is your recruiting pitch here. You're speaking to all the next-gen FBI agents, CISA, NSA.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, I've talked about this a lot. I feel strongly we need a national effort to educate on cyber from K through grade. So this is really about understanding cyber so that you can protect yourself from those who are digital natives to those who are digital immigrants, like my 88-year-old mother. I think that's incredible. It'll have two useful things. First of all, we will all know the basics of how to protect ourselves. It is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and we've been making a strong pitch that at the end of the day, it comes down to the basic steps around cyber hygiene. Obviously, sophisticated adversaries are going to break in if they want to, but for most Americans, it's really the basics of things like multi-factor authentication, updating your software, using strong passwords and a password keeper, and being aware of phishing. If we start that at the youngest level, Frank, I think that will start building that resilience. It'll also get kids interested in joining the cyber workforce from a much younger age. So I think that's incredibly important. And then there's the creativity part of this. I'm a big fan of Cyber Schoolhouse Rock, which I'm hoping we can somehow develop. So if any of you are interested, come see me afterwards. But this is about digital resilience as well. What does it mean to be a good digital citizen? And that's developing some of that resilience to things like misinformation and disinformation, which is a threat that as a mom, I worry about just as much as all of the cyber threats out there. So I say get them young and then bring them to CISA.
A bill in Capitol Hill. No, that's absolutely right. Rob? Paul, anything you want to zero in on that?
I was just going to add, obviously agree with everything that Chris and Jen said from the broad educational perspective. From an agency recruiting perspective, we have different levels of programs starting in elementary school, the Junior Special Agent Program, and then we have Future Agents in Training for middle school, high school, and then Citizen Academy. So we build on these things in an escalating way, and it's been very effective for us to go in and expose children at those younger ages to the FBI, to the mission, what we do. It's not always cyber specific, though we do incorporate cyber lessons, hygiene into that starting out in elementary school, and we've had very good results from that in terms of putting that into thoughts early on with individuals coming into the agency much later on post.
I'm going to make a quick little pitch for the Bureau on this. I mean, kids going to Hogan's, when they went early to, so many people did want to pursue that career. And down in Huntsville, you are building out that equivalent in a cyber range environment. So
Yes.
I hope you are able to recruit and retain some of those kids, as well as CISA, as well as NSA, as well as Berkshire Hathaway and everyone else. But Rob, any thoughts? I mean, NSA has always done this well.
Yeah, I won't add, we're in lockstep on all of this. The only point that hasn't come up is we need digital tradesmen. There is not always the need for the master's and PhD. There are people who have tremendous natural innate skill, as well as there's teachable skills that can get us to fill some of that gap that we have today. So I think we need to demystify that, that cybersecurity, cyber careers are just for that egghead geek who's going to go for 3 or 4 degrees.
But a lot of them are at the fort. So one thing I might also note that NSA does very uniquely, we've talked about diversity. One issue we didn't touch on is neurodiversity. And there are some really neat programs where some of the most talented people are contributing in massive and awesome ways that society otherwise wouldn't have provided some of those opportunities. So kudos on that. And you brought up NCSE, GCHQ has similar programs in the UK and thought that was great. Bill, you're going to get the final word here. Why does everyone go to Berkshire Hathaway as opposed to, no, I know you'll never say don't go to government, but final word in terms of what does your workforce of tomorrow look like?
Well, again, our needs are the exact same as government's needs. If you're a very talented individual and you want to do work in cyberspace, whether it's in private industry or in the government, it's great opportunities either way. And for us, as we work with our recruiting and with our customers, in our case at Berkshire Hathaway Energy, we have a motto of safe and secure, and we keep pushing that out, that it's not just safety of yourself and your families, but it's also the security of yourself and your families, and it's physical security and it's cyber security. And as we go into schools and talk with young kids who want to come up and do this type of thing, that's essentially the push that we make with them, is that do you want to be involved in something that enhances the safety and security of your community, of your family, of the broader population? And whether that's at a junior high, high school, or community college, we try and gender the excitement around going after that sort of a mission for us. And again, whether it's for us or whether it's for any of my colleagues on stage here, I think that we need as many people as we can find who want to do this work and can do it well, and get them into get them into the team. And as we move towards a more joint and collaborative environment, whether they're on one team or the other team, the beauty of it is we're all pushing together in the same way. And with that, I think from where we're starting today, we've got a tremendous future ahead of us that will deliver great benefits.
Well, I think you summed that up great. It is one team. And that's the only way I think we do shift the equation in our favor. And you couldn't have a better all-star team than we had the privilege of hosting today. Chris, Paul, Jen, Rob, Bill, thank you. Thanks for what you do every day. Keep fighting the good fight. And I apologize we have a lot of questions we didn't get to that I couldn't see well on stage, but a number of great points from InfraGard, which I do want to give a plug to, and other groups. So thank you for your time, and thank you for your service.
And thank you, Frank,
Thank you.
to the McCrary Institute.
Thank you.